red skies are stretching through the lonely night. The mountains become shadows. This wonders in my
Students have great gross motor skills overall, but their graphomotor skills seems to be lacking. Oftentimes, their handwriting resembles more of a 3rd grader than of a 7th grader. I think these skills could be greatly improved with practice, but the problem is actually getting the students to sit down and focus. Half of the class period seems to be spent just keeping them on track.
And the eagles, they are soaring out across the bay, rising on the wings of the wind in the freedom of this day. And there's a fire on the Atlantic. In the west tonight I see.
A lot of students in this class juggle with higher order cognition and also with mental processes. Often when they're assigned to work independently, they just give up, thinking that they can't complete a task, and suddenly resort to cheating. For instance, I was assigned to work with George, and George had difficulty with his concept formation. He had to write a myth about anything, and he told me he was going to write a myth about how apples were made. I said, okay, well, how were apples made? He said, well, they were made by a god who used his powers. And I said, how did the god use his powers? He made apples. Well, how did he make the apples? He used his powers. And so he just kept giving me these circular answers.
The world slips into the night, and there's a fire on the Atlantic in the west.
I asked the teacher if having the students' families involved would help to improve their behavior. She pointed to an example of a student named Jose, whose mother actually came to the classroom to observe his behavior.
He's turned, he's been fine, but that shows me that his mom is in complete control. Because he didn't want her to come in and sit next to him, but he knew whatever she said to him, it completely turned the situation around. And that's one of those cases where it's just a complete turnaround, where most of the times it's a slow return. So, but I can totally see the parents that are in charge in their home, and they're on top of their kids.
But just as the language barrier can cause difficulties with students like Ricardo, who didn't even know what heaven meant, it can also cause problems when trying to talk with parents, most of whom have a limited grasp on English as well.
But the challenge there is that a lot of the parents speak Spanish, and I have basic Spanish. Their behavior needs to improve, or they're getting
place where time can never reach. Some are reaching, few are there.
Connecting with students is critically important. As Mel Levine says on page 307 of his book, A Mind at a Time, a child's full experience is known for these actual changes in brain function and anatomy.
This guy here, this guy here, that lady here, and that lady there, and this guy here. We all have something we carry. I carry, you can see. So it has to be dealt with. Alright? I have to become personal with people immediately. With what you carry. And we all carry something, don't we? That we don't want to, that hurts a little bit or a lot. Well, folks, that you can see mine. That's what's really cool.
You're hiding out so painfully. See yourself come out to play. A lover's rain.
While students were very social in their subgroups, there was often certain students who were on the fringes, and they couldn't seem to break in. One girl was constantly referred to as Beaver. Another little boy was really gifted academically, but he was kind of ostracized in the classroom setting. The teacher informed me that he was somewhat cool on the playground, though, because he could play soccer well.
When your sister turns to leave, only when she's most in need. Take away the cause of pain.
isn't always addressed in the public school context, but it still emerges from time to time. I noticed this predominantly in a student named Aziza. She was always wearing beautiful hijabs, and one day I complimented her on it, and she just had the biggest smile on her face. Another time, there's a poster in the classroom that has hello from all different parts of the world, like bienvenue and hola. Well, she pointed to the Arabic word and said, "That's my language." And it's just really cool that she could identify with something part of her culture, even though she's in a classroom where the majority of kids are Hispanic.
The place we used to call our home.
Overall, while this experience was at times frustrating, I think it ultimately served as a wake-up call for me. I learned that I have to be a proactive teacher in order for my students to learn well. And this ultimately might mean learning Spanish, but if I'm able to show students that they're able to harness their difficulties with language, then it will cease to be a stumbling block for them and turn into a stepping stone.
I hear the call of the loon, see the roadside lupins bloom, in a land where the seas meet the gentle rolling hills, as the thunderhead roars through the sky and the lightning proudly dances in my eyes. Across Kelly's mountain, well, the winter has been harsh and it will surely take its toll. We may meet our maker long before we've grown old, but I will never call another place my home, 'cause I know where my roots are laid. I know where my fathers came from, a land that they could never roam. And it was our shores that took the men from the rolling seas and the howling winds. It will always be my home, always home.